Hi, this is Shinsuke Uchida from Nagoya City University in Japan. Today, I'm pleased to present our work. The title is Does Natural Disaster Affect Alcohol Consumption in the Long Run? This is a joint work with Taiki Kakimoto, my former student. So let me share the slides with you so that I can explain based on these from now on. All right, I hope you can see the presentation slides. So this study is about the natural disaster, especially about the Great East Japan earthquake or GEJE, which took place on March 11, 2011. This huge natural disaster with magnitude 9 hit areas in the Pacific coast of northern Japan, and it was followed by 10 to 15 meters of tsunami and also tremendous nuclear power plant accident at Fukushima. Now, it's been already 10 years since the disaster, but according to the survey, half of survey respondents still answered that the recovery and reconstruction of damaged areas are delayed than they expect. So the problem seems to persistent. So the motivation of this study is pretty simple: to examine how much and how long the GEJE has impacts on victims. Previous studies so far found that there are undesired impacts on their physical and mental conditions. We try to provide additional quantitative evidence that victims increased risk-taking behaviors, such as alcohol and tobacco consumption. The main contribution of this study is to investigate such behaviors in the long term and on a monthly basis. Previous studies tracked victims' conditions for 3 to 4 years at longest, but we believe that the impact continues longer. Our estimates are likely causal, as we use natural experiment of huge exogenous shock, and also we check pre-event parallel trend assumption, which is required when we employ difference in differences estimation method. To our knowledge, only a couple of related studies meet this assumption, mainly because the data before the event is difficult to collect. We use monthly data from 2000 to 2019, which enables us to validate parallel trend assumption. We also examine differential disaster impact by household type. We have employed and non-employed households, and non-employed households consist mainly of households who already retired. So this figure is a kind of the eyeball check of the parallel trend of alcohol consumption before the disaster in March 2011. We calculate annual average of the expenditure share of alcohol consumption per household, and then show the mean value across sample city groups by the severity of earthquake. Seismic intensity, or SI, over 6 is very severe damage from the earthquake. SI of 4 and 5 is medium, and SI of 3 or less is almost no damage. So before 2011, we see alcohol expenditure shares fluctuate a bit, but the trend looks similar across the severity groups. We also confirmed this statistically in the paper. But after 2011, alcohol consumption in severely damaged areas, SI of over 6, significantly increased, while the other two groups remain at almost the same level. So we use this kind of evidence to examine the long-term impacts of natural disaster, and as well As our brief summary, we find that the long-term positive impact of the GEJE on alcohol consumption in severely damaged cities. We also find that these impacts are more significant for non-employed households. We try to explain the mechanism why alcohol consumption increased and find that social isolation is a key. Okay, so from now on, we describe our identification strategy, show the estimation results, and then provide concluding remarks. So our identification comes basically from the severity of earthquake. This map gives you an idea of geographical location of these cities. We use the level of seismic intensity, SI, for identification. We consider cities with SI of 4, 5, and over 6 as our treatment separately and construct a set of treatment dummy variables. We have 4 cities which experienced SI over 6 around this area in red and pink dots. These cities are also hit by giant tsunami or highly influenced by nuclear power accident as well. The cities with SI of 4 or 5 are mildly affected areas in these yellow and orange dot regions. And our reference cities with SI of less than or equal to 3 are surrounded these green regions, green and blue regions. And this is our econometric model. In addition to these treatment dummy variables of J is 4, 5, or over 6, we have radiation activity level and also some other controlled variables to account for potential confounders. These covariates include household characteristics, weather variables, and also macroeconomic variables at the city level. We also include city by month fixed effects and year by month fixed effects to account for unobserved seasonality and macroeconomy shock. We cluster standard errors at the city level to account for serial correlation. Also, we weight regression by the number of households in each city. So by the way, our data is from 2000 to 2019, and we have average household expenditure share of alcohol beverages at the city level. So estimation results show that the disaster impacts are observed only in cities with SI over 6. Our baseline result is in the column 4. This indicates that the disaster event increased the expenditure share of alcohol by 0.067 percentage points relative to cities with SI 3 or less. This is equivalent to about 7% increase of alcohol consumption in monetary terms. Results appear robust with or without covariates and fixed effects by looking at these columns 1 to 3. And now looking at columns 5 and 6, these show results for the subsample of employed and non-employed households. We find that the quake impact is much more significant for non-employed households. Next, we check the dynamics of its impact by changing the sample period. Point estimates and their 95% confidence intervals show that the quake impact on alcohol consumption becomes more significant and larger after 2 years since the disaster. And again, this trend is more apparent for non-employed household sample compared to employed households. In either case, we only see the significant large impact on alcohol consumption in areas with seismic intensity over 6. So we try to explain the mechanism why alcohol consumption increased over time. We follow the sociology literature to focus on the social status of disaster victims. So for example, staying at home alone and doing nothing affects their mental status, and as a result, they tend to consume more alcohol. In order to check the association between the level of social isolation and alcohol consumption, we use the expenditure shares of social activities, such as having meals and chats with friends, and also participating in club activities outside, and also the expenditure shares of traveling. From these figures, parameter estimates and their 95% confidence intervals show that the expenditure share of social activities and traveling keep declining over time in the severely damaged areas. And finally, we also show the disaster impacts on the other risk-taking behavior, tobacco consumption. And the figure indicates that tobacco consumption increased over time, increased immediately after the disaster, but gradually decreased afterward in the severely damaged areas. So as a concluding remarks, we find persistent impacts of natural disaster on risk-taking behavior, especially for retired households. It is partly because they tend to lose social networks and socially isolated. Since such tendency is long-lasting, continuous help to rebuild community is needed, as well as individual supports. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your attention, and any comments would be appreciated. Thank you very much.